Well, welcome everyone. We have a very exciting presentation today, and so I don't want to take any more time waiting. I will let people apparate in as they will. Before we start, I want to just remind us that we have an upcoming event on July 10th with Sol Rosenthal, who's in the room today, I think. And also that Sol did a podcast with our presenter today, and you might want to check that out. That would be very interesting, I think, and exciting. We have our annual conference in October, and we hope that you will join us. We have a great lineup. Okay. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Manuel Halter. Dr. Halter is a Green Beret and a retired member of the U.S. Army Special Forces. After he retired from the Army, he got his doctorate in philosophy with a specialization in talent performance optimization. He also holds an undergraduate degree in psychology, a master's of arts in developmental psychology, and a master's of arts in clinical neuropsychology. His passion is not just for healing the mind and body, but also optimizing physical and cognitive performance. This has been a driving force in his pursuit of knowledge and understanding the human brain and psychophysiological processes. So he will tell you much more about his history into this field, and I'm turning it over to Dr. Halter. I just want to say that I will be monitoring the chat. If there's something that is an emergency that you want me to bring up, just put it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll have time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Halter, and thank you for the great introduction, and I appreciate it. So let me just share my screen real quick so we can get this on the way. So the way I'm going to talk about this is I'm going to use the slides mainly as a guide to keep me on track. But I'm going to share a little bit about my history and why that is important in coming up with this assessment process that I've developed along with several others while I was working as a contractor for special operations. And this process has actually had it came up back before I even decided to go into this area. And the way it started out is when I retired from the military. But before we get to that point, I want to share a little bit about what my experience was in the military, because it has to do with how I developed this process. So this right here, this bottom line up front, is what I let people know whenever they come in, to let them know what it is that we're doing. So in order for people to cognitively enhance their performance, whether it is pathology or just to actually become a higher performer than they already are, we actually help individuals to optimize their functioning by making them aware of the underlying physiological processes. And by fostering this awareness, it will help or allow people to manage their emotions, their cognitions, and their cognitive functions effectively. And thereby they can then allow certain functions to happen when indicated to perform at an optimal level. So back in the day, when I was on active duty, I was actually in special operations. I was both an intel sergeant for my team, as well as a medic. So looking at those two areas together, I figured out, okay, what would be a good process that would be customizable to anybody and everybody, but yet allow for customization for training purposes. So the way that I looked at it was, okay, in the intel world, we had a rule of thumb. So we had to have at least 3 independent sources that tell us some information about what is going on for that information to be actionable. And for instance, let's say we have a financier in Iraq, let's say, and we have individuals telling us about where this person is located and what this person is doing. Well, in order for that information to be actionable, we want those sources to be independent of each other. So we don't just want family members of one family telling us about what's going on, or competitors of that individual, or whatever it is. We want independent sources that really don't share anything in common except for their experience with the financier. So that led me to developing a process where we look at self-report measures. So that's one source, just to let me know what the individual is actually experiencing. And that is where self-report measures come in, and they're very important, letting me know what the experience is of the individual. Then I looked at the functional aspect. So I needed something that tells me about what is going on in the individual. And that's why EEG and heart rate variability metrics come in. So this tells me about objectively what is actually happening functionally in the individual. Then I have a third source, which is a performance metric of some sort. You can use any kind of performance metric, but it has to be information that I can see across all the different metrics. So in order for it to be actionable, it has to be information that I can see across all the metrics, not just in self-report, not just in EEG, not just in performance metrics, but we want something that I can trace along all these different metrics in order to make them actionable. So here's the agenda. First, I'll talk about the holistic assessment of resilience and performance, which is the process. And then I'll talk a little bit about the key points of assessing of assessing the individual and how to design a training protocol. Then I'll go really quickly through a training protocol, an example of a training protocol, and I'll then finish up with some training considerations to keep in mind. So the holistic assessment of resilience and performance, I started developing this process before I even really retired from special operations. And I used this information, and I actually did my dissertation just to see if it's a viable model. And the results that I got were amazing. And if any of you want to look at my dissertation, down here is my dissertation reference on the bottom here. So again, the HARP, this process delivers a comprehensive, reliable, and stable brain and heart health biomarkers that can aid in the assessment of processing speed, mood, autonomic activity, and numerous other cardiac and brain functions and metrics rehabilitatively. So to the left side of the boom. So again, if we can look at a person and track them throughout their career, or not just their career, but for military and first responders, it's important to actually have a starting point. Where were they when they started their career? And then doing these assessments periodically and giving them the indicated types of biofeedback, neurofeedback, or whatever else is indicated, we can then mitigate those things before we get to the point where the person is actually already suffering from some kind of ailment that impedes them from or keeps them from performing at their best. So again, this process helps us to look at not just the person and ailments, but this process also looks at various domains of a person's existence. We look at physical, social, spiritual, psychological, cognitive performance. And looking at all of those, they give us a little bit of information about the individual. But again, we also have to be able to see those in other metrics. So how do we do that? Well, again, this is just another slide that tells us about what HARP is. And again, we collect all these different metrics to triangulate afterwards, and then we know where the individual is at and what the needs of the individuals are. So again, this whole process is pre-abilitative or proactive. So to the left of the boom. So this is this model that I'm talking of in this presentation is, again, we have this pre-abilitative, pre-training kind of model where we can help a person to remain resilient once they get to a place where they experience some kind of event that could be considered a TBI or something traumatic. Because again, the research tells us that if a person has or does some kind of training rehabilitatively, it helps them to become more resilient in case something does happen during deployments, for instance. So then they're able to bounce back from those events more effectively. And that is what resilience really is. So again, this is the model, and the traditional medical model is, okay, somebody comes into the office and has certain complaints, then they get a diagnosis, and then we basically start working with the individual once they're already in a place that, where the damage is done. So why not do it rehabilitatively? And why that matters so much with the military and first responders is because we want to have a return on investment of the training that we have for our first responders and military. And we want them to have as much longevity in their job as possible. So how do we do that? We assess them again and again and again, and then give them the kind of training they need to perform optimally. And it's almost akin to looking at a car and and periodically doing the oil changes and all the different things that you do to keep a car at its highest performance. So that's what this process is really like. So when it comes to self-report measures and measures that I use, I picked measures that had to meet several criteria. One is they had to have strong psychometric properties. Why? Because I don't want a scale that is not validated or that's unreliable. So I picked scales that had high psychometric properties. Then I also wanted measures that give me information about the individuals of different aspects of their life. And those I actually have to also be able to see in the EEG or other performance metrics. So the ones that I picked were the DAS-21 or 42, which is an organizational measure that was created by Lovibond and Lovibond in Australia, and it's an organizational scale. But it also measures depression, anxiety, and stress. It's not a clinical scale, but it was created to assess employees, a level of stress, of course, anxiety, and depression. Then I also look at the Holmes-Rahe life event scale, not again to determine how likely this person is to suffer some kind of ailment, but to take under consideration and to rule out that the activity that I see in the brain or in their performance is not due to some kind of event, some kind of traumatic event or stressful event in their life. So that's why I picked that scale, just to, again, as a way to account for different things that are happening to the individual. Then also ask the individuals to fill out the Myers-Briggs type indicator at 16personalities.com. And again, why do I do that? Because once I'm done assessing, or once I'm done with the whole assessment process, I can use that to fine-tune the person's training by having something that I know they'll comply with more effectively. Because again, if I assign somebody with a personality that is, that of a person who wants structure, and I give them something that is more general and abstract, they're not going to comply as well as if I give them something they can actually work with that matches their personality. Then I also look at the compound psychological capital scale, which is a scale that measures hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. And so across every area of a person's life. Why is that important? Because again, hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism are the factors that researchers in the organizational world have found that everybody who is very successful at what they do, they found that these four different constructs are something that all of them have a lot of, who are successful, that is. Then CSRI, the CSRI 24 is the Spiritual Intelligence Self-Report Inventory, and it measures things like transcendental awareness or meaning making. And again, why is that important? If a person has the ability to reframe stuff in their life or information or an incident that may be traumatic, and they're able to reframe it as something positive and able to create meaning from that, that again is a part of something that helps a person to stay resilient or be resilient. Then also the sleep scales, that I found that sleep scales weren't very helpful because people are very poor at tracking their sleep. So there are other ways of tracking a person's sleep. And in the only thing I really want to know is not what stages of sleep the person gets into, but what is their general sleep structure? What is their circadian rhythm like? Because again, that helps me in determining what kind of protocol will be effective with the individual based on and when to actually do that kind of training and advise the person to do the training that I tell them to do. Again, when they sleep or how they sleep or the consistency of their sleep cycle is huge. And it's also huge in determining how recovered a person is. Then I looked at the friendship scale as well, which again, it's a 6-item scale, which looks at isolation and social support. And looking at all these measures together is really what gives me a good picture of what's happening with the individual and how they perceive the various areas or domains of their life. For instance, if I looked at, and what's really nice about it, also people have a tendency to fill out information more accurately if they really don't know what it is that I want them to answer, because people have a tendency to answer questions in line with what they think the person who's testing them wants to see. So again, these scales are scales that if looking at them individually, you know, somebody may answer more. Like if I give somebody a suicidality scale, for instance, people are not going to be very forthright with their answers. Or also the audit or some type of alcoholism scale. People are not going to be very straightforward. But let's say I have a picture of all these scales together. So let's say I see somebody in the DAS 21 or 42 that is depressed, anxious, or is experiencing a lot of stress. Then in the Holmes-Rahe life event scale, I see, okay, there's several stressful events that person has been experiencing that are very traumatic. Then I know, okay, this may be something that it may be still affecting the individual. So if I see in the EEG that something akin to, that looks very similar to somebody who has a busy brain or is very activated, or, you know, depending on what metrics I see in the EEG, I can then, you know, match it with what I see in the self-report measures. But let's say that same individual does not have any hope or doesn't feel very optimistic about their life, judging from the compound psychological capital scale. In addition to that, that individual also, you know, doesn't have the ability to, doesn't see anything bigger than themselves, so no transcendental awareness. They also have trouble creating meaning. If I see that in the scale, then in the friendship scale, the person is isolating, has poor social support. Again, you can see here how the big picture then lets me know about where that person is holistically. Then, of course, I have different performance tests, such as the brain gauge or the TOVA, where I have something that specifically tests what I'm actually trying to then address when I develop a training plan. So I want a performance test, some kind of cognitive performance test that measures a lot of the different areas of cognitive performance, but not in a sense where I can't use a test that measures numerous different areas of the brain all at once. Why? Because that doesn't tell me anything about what pathways or what connectivity metrics, or it doesn't help me to match it to what I see in the EEG. So I want something very discrete. And one test out there that's very discrete, and I'll go a little bit more into that as through this presentation, but it is the brain gauge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. Then also the EEG, the ERPs, heart rate variability. I do all of this at the same time. And this whole process takes about 45 minutes to complete. All of it. The reason why I want them to fill out the self-report measures at the same time as or not simultaneously, but in the same appointment, is because of transient different types of symptoms, or not symptoms, but activity that a person may be feeling they're experiencing. For example, a person may be stressed in the morning because they have a test in the afternoon, but after the test, they're not as stressed anymore. So if I did the EEG in the morning when they're really stressed and they fill out the self-reports and measures in the afternoon, I won't find a match and I want to rule out any kind of confounding variables. So that's why I do this whole process at the same time. Now, as the practitioner or the person who analyzes the EEG and the functional measures, as well as the objective performance measure, I do not have any conversations with the client before I do the analysis. And even the self-report measures are collected by somebody else, not myself. So you can have a tech in the office or somebody else who does the collection of these measures. So I want them collected, but as the practitioner or the person who does the analysis, I do not want to know about them, and that keeps me unbiased. So that, because again, for those of you who have been working with EEG and all these metrics for a long time, if you're looking for something, you can probably find it. So in order to keep myself honest, I go through the process of artifacting and analyzing all the EEG data, heart rate variability data, and then I come up with hypotheses in my brain. And those I then compare and match later on. Once I've done the analysis, I match those hypotheses to the person's self-report measures, their performance measures. Once I have all that, I then do the review with the client of what's going on. And that person then usually comes and tells me even more information that matches the EEG and the performance metrics that they were either too afraid or to talk about, or things that they may not have thought about while they're filling out the self-report measures, or the self-report measures may not have even really addressed that particular issue. But I usually find out more information when I do the review with them. And at that point, I then recommend certain types of interventions or training. So here is, again, a picture of the whole model. So the client gives me all their self-report and relevant history of lab, and we can refer them to have labs done if indicated. But again, having all this information can be very helpful. But as I stated earlier, I'm not privy to that information until I actually look at, until I've actually done my assessment and analysis of the functional measures. And again, I want somebody to remain within this green area. And that's what this model does. It's pre-habilitative. But if indicated, then we can refer somebody, let's say I have a particular service member who needs some kind of nutrition counseling, sleep counseling, or any of the services that you see on the right here. Then I can refer them to the appropriate, or give them the appropriate training, whether it's neurofeedback, biofeedback, or any of these other interventions. So again, this assessment, I look at all these different things: head maps, brain biomarkers, event-related potentials, neuropsychological testing or cognitive testing, and some kind of performance test is indicated or is part of that neuropsychological testing. But again, when we look at event-related potentials, for instance, I can know what the person's capacity and speed of attending or processing is, depending on if I look at the P300A or P300B wave. And that's just one example. And looking at all these different biomarkers or these different metrics helps me put together a nice picture of where the person is brain-wise. And that then, again, it becomes part of the matching process. And when it comes to head maps, here's one. So when it comes to head maps, what I really use them for is After I make sure that the EEG is actually clean and all the different functional metrics, even heart rate variability, the beat to beat intervals, and all of those, I clean them up and make sure that I have awesome data. So then after that, I go and look at the quantitative metrics to then either corroborate or what my hypotheses already are, or if I see a difference between the head maps or the quantitative metrics and my hypotheses, I can go back and look at the raw data to either then see something that I may have missed, or for example, if I see harmonics or something, I can then say, okay, these are harmonics. This is not real EEG activity. So, and I can then, make that determination by going back and forth between the functional metrics and or the raw EEG and raw data and the quantitative metrics that we see in the head maps and most of the reports that we get nowadays from different software applications. Again, here's some of the things I look at amongst very many, so this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but two of those that have been supported strongly by research is the posterior dominant rhythm or peak alpha frequency, as well as the theta beta ratio in certain areas of the brain. Again, those are just two metrics, but there are so many different quantitative metrics to look at, but the ones that I really make sure I look at are those that match what those things that I have hypotheses of just by looking at the raw data. Again, we already talked a little bit about ERPs and looking at all these biomarkers helps us to also get to a problem before it becomes a problem. There are things that, for example, dementia, where you can see certain types of inflammation or certain aspects in the EEG that could indicate, hey, this person is more likely than the average person to develop some kind of issue brain-wise, some kind of encephalopathy or some type of degradation in brain performance just based on what we already see in certain metrics in the EEG, certain functional metrics. And that then also gives us an indication of what kind of intervention is appropriate. Again, we're looking at neuropsychological testing. We can use go, no-go tests. And usually when I do ERPs, that is also part of what I look at. I look at response time, but then also, is the person more likely to press too often or not enough? So again, it gives me some kind of indication of what that person is experiencing. So here is now we're going to go into some key points to assess when designing a protocol. So first we go through this assessment. And as you see here, I put the self-report, EEG, HRV, brain gauge data all together, and that helps me determine what the training protocol is. Well, as you may know, we don't see pathologies in the brain. We see certain aspects of the brain that are consistent with certain pathologies or certain diagnoses. So the way I do it is I have the service member's goal. So the person tells me after I've done the whole assessment and I'm reviewing their data with them, I ask them what their goal is, and we solidify what the person's goal is. So then I put it, whatever their goal is, I put it into things or activity that I can actually see in the EEG. For example, this individual wanted to attend better to complex sets of information, quickly process and encode them. And this information, and then based on this information, develop and clearly present optimal courses of action as indicated by relevant information or intelligence. So then I put into, as you see here in capital letters, I put the things that I'll be looking for in the EEG that match. So again, I can see certain aspects of attention. I can see certain aspects that indicate information processing is effective, or memory formation, or recall, or executive function, language, verbal communication, and so forth. So then I have their goal. Then I Along with their goal, I let them know, okay, in order for us to develop a training protocol that's effective for you, we have to, there are certain implications of other domains that I personally may not be, that I may not personally not be monitoring, but that the individual through referrals or themselves can monitor a certain activity. For instance, the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system must be functioning at levels of, or functioning at levels of high neuronal efficiency. This implies that recovery must be optimized and that at near optimal levels of nutrition, exercise, sleep, and neuroendocrine balance should be a priority. So let's say the EEG shows me that there could be some kind of, the person is not recovering fully. Well, because for example, human growth hormone and other hormones are released by the pituitary gland during stages 3 and 4 of sleep. If somebody has indicated to me that they have sleep issues, I can refer them to have labs drawn just to make sure that neuroendocrine issues aren't part of the equation that causes problems for the individual. Because again, if we don't account for that first, then the training plan or the training protocol may not be as effective for the client. So to maximize effectiveness, these are some of the things that I let the person know that they should also take under consideration. So then I'm in the matching process, I then look at the EEG report, being satisfied that the data is clean, that I'm not looking at any kind of artifact or anything that could interfere with my interpretation of what's going on. I then come to the report. And as you see here, everything that the person has endorsed as part of their goal, I mark in red here, or I highlight it in red. And that informs me about some of the training protocols that I develop for the individual. So this is the eyes closed portion. This is the eyes open portion. And again, all the red, the aspects that are in red here are the things that match what the person's goals are. And they're self-report measures. Then I also look at their heart rate variability metrics, and I use Kubios. I love Kubios, and I import all the beat-to-beat intervals, or also ECG data or EKG data. I can import into Kubios and look at certain metrics. Some of the metrics that I look at, I have highlighted here in green. And just looking at this person's overall power, it's relatively low. On the bottom here, we see total power, so 401. That usually 800 or higher is preferred. I like to say 1,000 milliseconds squared, but again, there's differences in opinion amongst practitioners, but I prefer to have people above 1,000 total power, and that's milliseconds squared. Then I also look at the RR spectrum on the side. And again, if a person is, this is in the middle of the day when we did this assessment. So judging from this, the person's parasympathetic activity is still too high. Their RMS is, and that tells me that the person is not fully recovered. And that is, we see that in the U-shape form here. So again, I see that the person is very stressed, not recovered. And then I also look at what their goals are and what I see in the EEG, and I can already form some kind of idea in my mind what this person needs and to develop the protocol. Then here's the cognitive test or the brain gauge data. And these are the areas where the person did poorer on their performance. And again, this also tells me, and I know it's very difficult to see, but when I talked about a discrete test before that looks at cognitive function, I want something to be, for example, the time perception is associated with the duration discrimination task and the how long pathway, so the corticocerebellar pathway. And so now I know exactly what to look for to see if it matches the EEG. Because if it does, and the person again, wants to function more effectively, then I can use that in forming my protocol, my training protocol. And again, here we look at the head maps, and here's again we look at this cortical, what's it called, the certain pathways in the brain, as well as certain locations. Certain areas that I may want to look at when I do this when I develop a protocol. Then I give the person this training protocol, and I let the person know that, okay, this is the initial plan. However, it may change depending on how the person responds to the training. So I tell the individual that, okay, in order for my work to be as effective as possible, I want you to make sure that you have consistent physical activity, that you follow a certain diet, a healthy diet, and that your sleep initiation and duration is pretty consistent, and also that you don't have any kind of neuroendocrine issues. So once all those are ruled out, I know that my training protocol, if I designed it right, will be as effective as possible. So I tell the individual, there's various different phases that we're going to go through in our training. So, for example, here you see the first 2 weeks. This is what I recommend for the individual. And again, to help the person recover and to, again, get to a place where their brain can actually, function more efficiently, I want this person to do HRV training and also to engage in things like cold showers and ice baths to reduce inflammation. So then phase 2, I then continue what I did in phase 1, but then we add neurofeedback sessions, 3 neurofeedback sessions, and I'll talk a little bit about what those were, what those are in a minute. And then also we do a reassessment and, at the end of every phase, just to see where the person's at and make any adjustments to the training plan. And then, of course, there's phase 3 here, which is 7 weeks plus of the things that we're going to start at that time. So again, when it comes to designing this protocol, we have to take certain aspects under consideration. For instance, I have a baseline, and I do a baseline at every session. Then I go through training and a post-baseline. I monitor and I look at how every session, how they progress over the sessions. And then every 10 to 20 sessions, I do another assessment. And then for instance, if a person doesn't respond in any kind of way to some kind of training in about 5 sessions, I also adjust the protocol as indicated. For example, here's the phase 1 training, and I teach the person about autogenic training and how to monitor their overall attention throughout their body, and so that the person can relax. And they can do this autogenic training while they do the heart rate, the breathing training. So combining several modalities is also the part of the secret sauce of what makes this process very effective. Is I don't just do HRV training. I don't just do temperature training. I don't just do neurofeedback training. I combine as many different modalities as are indicated and productive and put them together. For example, diaphragmatic breathing can be combined with autogenic training. The person checks in with their body, and that then promotes mindfulness about being there in the moment. First, I make sure that they even know how to breathe. Most people assume that people breathe correctly, which is a really bad assumption, because from my experience I've never seen, in my entire, I may have come across 2 people who actually breathe correctly when they started with me, but that's because they did that kind of training before. People have a tendency to not breathe at a regular volume, or their transitions are messed up. They're not smooth, or their pace is too fast or too slow. And again, once a person knows how to breathe, that's the starting point. The person knows how to breathe. From there, I can then introduce a pace. Then after the pace is introduced and I match, or there's a match between their heart rate and their breath cycle, that is where I want them to be. And that's, once they get to that point, they train and train and train. I give them homework assignments, and I can track them through certain apps that they can be using. But apps are really effective, but they're not effective if a person doesn't know how to breathe. It only makes people more frustrated in the app, and then they stop using it. And that's why compliance is very low with some people who do this type of work. So again, I make sure that they know to breathe correctly, and I take them through this type of training. Then I also let them know, okay, this is the type of neurofeedback that's been indicated by your EEG and functional metrics. I give them the sources, what I'm doing, what we're training with this, with the particular protocol. And again, this gives them all the information. They may not know what SMR is, but those are the kind of things I explain to the individual. But here they have a pretty good idea of what I'm trying to accomplish with a certain protocol. And people, from my experience, get really excited if I can show them actual resources and with references, because again, it makes people feel more, have more confidence that what you're doing with them is actually effective and is based on research. Then the phase 2, I go to alpha theta training from SMR training. Again, I explain to them specifically what I'm trying to accomplish with this. And if you see, and again, here you can see how it matches what the person is actually trying to accomplish. In order for a person to be able to attend or to be focused, they have to calm down their limbic system. Once their limbic system is relaxed, they can then take advantage of the frontal cortex or the cognitive activities of the brain more effectively. So just by teaching somebody, a lot of times just by doing heart rate variability for a couple of weeks, a lot of the different things that we see in the brain are also improving. And that's why every phase I do another assessment, just to make sure that how I've been training the individual is actually effective. And of course, I track every single session and make sure that I have the desired change, not just self-report wise from the individual, but also looking at the different metrics that I collect while I'm going through the training. Then again, we have this. Then we have FPO2 training, and again for anxiety and stress issues that the person may be experiencing. And I let the person know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with this type of training. Then phase 3, we go into more advanced types of breathing because from a lot of the people that I know, they train a person to breathe diaphragmatically, but they don't really have these advanced forms of breathing that they teach. So I go through advanced types of breathing methods that they can use, to go from box breathing to lateral breathing. And again, I use a system of how many muscle groups are you controlling when you're or managing when you're going through breathing practice. So I go from diaphragmatic.
Hi there. Good, thanks.
Hello?
I think it was an error, but continue.
Oh, okay. So when we look at diaphragmatic breathing, a person is trying to manage their diaphragm and not use their intercostal muscles. So that's how I go about training a person how to breathe. Then I go from just diaphragmatic breathing, where we manage the diaphragm effectively, to box breathing, where we then also, in addition to the diaphragm, we now have to manage the intercostal muscles. So again, it takes a little bit more skill, but that's why I go in that order. Then when we go to lateral breathing, we don't just look at diaphragmatic breathing or look at using intercostal muscles, but these muscles then have to also function within the parameters set by the core muscles. So again, this breathing is a little bit more difficult to do, but again, depending on, but there are different types of breathing that a person can use throughout the day. For instance, when a person does some public speaking, they can use certain types of breathing that will help them to stay relaxed. And again, that helps them to focus better if they keep their limbic system at bay or at a certain level where they're not too activated. And again, then there's tactical breathing, and I go through that. Then again, once the person has learned all of those, we then do the type of training where I actually ask a person to, to put certain types of skills that I taught them together into a certain protocol, where they then go through that protocol, and then they realize, oh my gosh, I've been able to do this task a lot more effectively, whether it is running, whether it is any activity. So this is not just for neurofeedback or biofeedback, but again, this can help a person perform different kinds of more optimally perform different types of activities by just being able to gain this awareness of what's going on with the person. I can also use this assessment process to see if anything is working. Like, let's say somebody doesn't really want to do neurofeedback or biofeedback, but has for some reason they decide they just want to do EMDR. Well, this is a perfect process to do a pre-assessment and post-assessment to see what the changes are that EMDR did for the individual. So again, this can be used for anything, this process, not just, and it's not just an assessment to determine a protocol for biofeedback or neurofeedback, but anything. And we can also see if it's effective or not for the individual. So here's some more considerations about the training plan. And again, no training plan can encompass all the variables that may happen. And in my experiences, I've had no training plan that stayed the way it was from the initial inception all the way to the end. There are going to be changes. But again, we have to look at matches, subjective and objective matches that we can then use to fine-tune the training protocol. And I always keep in mind that whatever the person's goals are, and they may change as well to a certain extent. They may become more aware that the goal they had initially was not really what they pictured or what they wanted to accomplish. So they may change things to a certain extent. And then I talk to them about what I see in all these different metrics. And, I recommend certain types of protocols for training. But those are some things that I always ask people to keep in mind. And here's some things that I tell people about, okay, if you can't see me for a couple of weeks, these are some things that you can do to, until you see me again. And again, it's just a checklist that a person can go through until they come into the office and see me the next time. So again, the summary is that near optimal levels of nutrition, exercise, sleep, and neuroendocrine balance, along with autogenic training, biofeedback, neurofeedback, and indicated mental skills training, peak cognitive performance can be realized. On a cognitive level, the service member can learn to let go of control and without judgment, gain greater awareness of internal physiological mechanisms that lead to ideal neuronal efficiency. In practical terms, this process allows for the execution of situationally ideal mental and physiological responses, also known as peak cognitive performance. So that is it for my presentation. But before I stop, so this whole process is more elaborated on in a course that In Mind Out and Successful Practitioner are going to be offering. We just got done with the recording of all the videos and all the things that we needed to do, all the manuals that we needed to put together. And so we will be offering this course, which will go further in depth on the stuff that I just talked about and much more. Again, here are some In Mind Out Successful Practitioner classes that are coming up in September. And you can also schedule a free consultation with Kelly for 25 minutes just to give you more information about, what courses should I take, which courses meet my needs, and so forth. And again, here's another list of the courses that Successful Practitioner will be offering and In Mind Out. So if you're interested in coming to any of these courses, I highly recommend them, not because I work for them, but because they're great, and that's why I work for them. But anyways, that is it for me, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much. There are a few questions in the chat. The first one is, Tim would be curious to hear the rationale for box breathing.
Rationale for box breathing. Box breathing is great if somebody needs to maintain a certain level of arousal. So if I want to regulate my heart rate when I engage in a certain type of activity and keep it there so that I effectively and efficiently perform at that rate. For example, I can put somebody on a treadmill and see where their breathing is optimal and how deep the person should breathe. And that will then help them to perform better as a runner. And box breathing is a type of breathing where you breathe in, keep you keep your breath rate, or you have a pause, then you exhale, then there's a pause. And again, that allows the inhalation, exhalation, and the pauses, they can be changed in duration, for example, anywhere from 1 second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, as long as the person does it consistently, and that allows their heart rate and autonomic function to be regulated while engaged in a task.
So as a follow-up, Tim is asking if you're suggesting to pause during exercise.
To pause during exercise? Well, yes. And again, with the athletes that I've been working with at the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, I helped individuals to realize, look, if you're constantly on the go and if you don't breathe appropriately, you may be expanding more energy than is necessary during a certain task. For instance, on the basketball team, if a person, or on the football team, if during a play, you want the person to be able to activate and go all out. But then once that play is over, we want the person to be able to return to baseline. And by doing these different types of breath training, we help the person's autonomic nervous system to be as responsive as possible to the environment. And that's where the different types of breathing come in, because certain activities, certain types of breathing are create more efficiency, neuronal efficiency, than other types of breathing. And so once they have those skills, they can use those skills during the different sports or activities.
Thank you. And Philip added into the chat that this breathing can be done while responding to hot calls. So thank you.
Yeah. And that's why box breathing is particularly very important for people like the military and first responders, because let's say you have a firefighter going into a building. You want them not to expand too much energy. You want them to be able to, to conserve as much energy as they can, because it's a difficult task. And so them having that skill will improve their performance.
Thank you. Gary Ames asked about results, success rates, degree of attainment of goals, how many neurofeedback sessions, things like that. Do you have few comments?
Well, that's a very loaded question, but so the success rates that I have seen are always in the 90s with every single person I train now. 90% success rate, and that is statistical significance. And using a statistic like the reliable change index, so I know that person's performance is actually improving above what the variability of the instrument is. So again, using that type of statistic, I can monitor a person and see if they're actually really truly improving. And again, the tailoring the protocol specifically to the needs of the client is the biggest and the most important aspect of doing this whole process. And again, that's where that's the beauty of this assessment process. We actually look at the whole person it's like looking at an elephant from all sorts of sides, just to get a real good idea of what is actually bothering the elephant. And I'm not saying my clients are elephants, but it's just an analogy to show that we actually can look at the whole person And by looking at the whole person, we can actually come up with a better protocol than if we just used, like, let's say I used just self-report measures and EEG. There are some things that heart rate variability metrics tell me that the EEG doesn't, or not as effectively, that I can use. And that's why I look at all these metrics together. And the nice thing about this whole process is also that it's designed to fit everybody, but is very customizable. And for populations like the military or first responders, we need something that is all-encompassing the whole person that we're trying to evaluate. But then also that should also be a process that lets us customize our protocol specifically to the needs of the client.
Thank you very much. Before we go into follow-up questions, and because we're getting to the end of our time, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Halter, for this very information-packed presentation. And also to say that NRBS wants to thank our sponsor for this presentation, Biomedical. They have a sale going on their front page on their website. Ronnie's going to be putting the website into the chat. So thank you. I'm so glad we were able to show this for you all. It's in the chat now. And Heather Ingram has put into the chat a way to sign up for a course with Dr. Halter. There's one more question that is in the chat that I can find here, and that is wondering, and it relates to what you've just finished talking about, if you can comment on your decision-making tree for so many different types of data informing so many different kinds of interventions.
Yes, and to answer that question, it's kind of like looking at a crime scene. Initially, I just want to look at the crime scene. I want to have this crime scene as sterile as possible. So that means cleaning up the data as effectively as possible. From there, I then look at what does this show, what regulations do I see, or what is not, what is it in the individual that I see could be a problem. For example, if I have somebody who has a low amplitude EEG and their heart rate variability metrics indicate that they're not recovered, again, here's something I can work on with the person. If they say, look, I feel tired all the time, I'm fatigued. Oh, what? Look, it matches what I saw in the metrics. Then the person also, like in their performance tests, I see that the person is not able to focus or attend, and that may be due to various different reasons. But again, whatever matches across all the different metrics that I have in my assessment is what I then talk to the client about. So then the decision, from there, I have my own ideas what I think I could be using. And we go more into this in the course, the military and first responder course, about how to make those decisions, because it's a very complex process. But we actually do look at all these different metrics, and whatever matches across all the metrics, that's what's in my mind, possible protocols. Then I talk to the client about it, and those possibilities are narrowed down further and further and further until we get to a point where we have a starting point of the actual training protocol. So the training protocol is developed after I meet with the client and we have reviewed everything and I know what the person is really trying to accomplish. Then I put together the training protocol, send it to the individual. And before I actually start the training when they come in, so on the third session when they come in to start their training, I then review with them again, okay, these are goals. This is what I think we should do for training. What do you think? And then if they agree, and they usually tell me, yeah, you're the expert, I'll just do what you say. Then I'll say, okay, let's do that. So again, I go from there. And then you have to also be very flexible with the training protocols, because again, circumstances may change. They may not be able to come into the office as much as possible. So you have to have contingencies in place that allow people who are now deployed or in a different location, but they want to continue the training, but they can't come into the office. And again, we talk about those different types of decisions and different types of ancillary decisions or decisions that are plan Bs or plan Cs that we actually use, that we go through. We describe those in depth in the military and first responder course.
So I know we're out of time, and I know some people will have to drop off, but there is one more question that just came onto the chat, if you don't mind. How do you work with the issue of learning consolidation of neurofeedback with first responders that are chronically sleep deprived?
That's an awesome question. I don't. I make sure that they're able to relax and rest first. If they can't recover, they can't take advantage of neurofeedback at all, because neurofeedback is based on learning theory. I don't want to give them something that is not going to be effective. So with those individuals, and with the help of other individuals that I refer them to, sleep experts or whatever may be indicated, I work with those individuals, and together we come up with a plan for that individual. However, we can always, regardless of the person, of where the person is, we can help them to relax and to balance their autonomic nervous system through heart rate variability training, helping them to learn how to breathe first. Once they learn how to breathe and have that skill, oh my gosh, it is a game changer for individuals. But again, keep in mind, they need to breathe correctly first. Don't start with a pace of a certain rate. Start with teaching them how to breathe, making sure that their breath cycle is smooth. How do you do that? You have some kind of a breathing belt in your assessment, or when you do the heart rate variability training. I don't rely on me just looking at their tummy. Okay, yeah, you look like you're breathing correctly. I don't do that. I insist on having a breathing belt so that I know that their breath cycle is smooth. Once you know that, I go from there. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. And there's some thanks in the chat as well. Again, I appreciate you joining us and appreciate our sponsor for making this possible. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you all. I appreciate it. I'll stay on a little bit longer in case there's some other people who have questions.
People end up leaving because the lunch hour is over, back to work. So there were several.
Yes.
Great presentation. Thank you.
It seems like there are a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was overall around 40 people, and 3 people just emailed me that they cannot attend today. But once the recording is up, I will let you know, Dr. Halter, and also everyone else, so people can watch it on their convenient time. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And it was great working with you guys.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
You see the chat, all the thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I tried to.
Naomi wrote, thank you. And job done. So
Thank you, Dom.
Right. Okay. Bye.